All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the July Gen 3 Community Forum. Um, Happy to have you joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about security and compliance. So we have, I think, some really good presentations from folks. Can you go to the next slide, Charisma? We have some really good presentations from folks around the world, which will hopefully be helpful for any other operators that are considering spinning up a Gen 3 system. So I'm really looking forward to the content today. Before we get started, we don't have too many announcements. I'll just mention that today's speakers are the first ones that were eligible for the hat and cup Gen 3 swag. So congrats to the speakers. Let me just put that link in the chat so folks um, that aren't speaking today know about these awesome prizes that they can give if they do volunteer to give a talk. You can also get the Gen 3 swag in a couple other ways. On that site, you can see whether it's submitting and getting PRs approved, responding to community questions, or creating a blog post. So yeah,
And
thanks
I
everyone.
just let me make a comment. We've developed AI agents to monitor eBay, and even though the swag is worth hundreds of dollars, we expect you to keep it and not try to monetize it. These are very, very capable agents. Just a warning to the current and future speakers. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Bob, for
You're welcome.
that warning. Um, okay, so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Clint Malson from our group at the University of Chicago. Um, Clint, please take it away. Next slide, please, Charisma.
Thanks. Um, yeah, so we're here to talk about securing the Gen 3 data commons, um, specifically the US and FedRAMP and FISMA. Um, so, yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. So Gen 3 operates at FedRAMP moderate and some FISMAs as well, but we're in this weird high friction space where we are a SaaS provider, scientific research center. Our mission is public discovery, but often the federal mandate is total lockdown. They would prefer you don't have any data access. They would prefer you don't actually make anything public. So this paradox creates an interesting pattern, especially being open source. This marks our 5th year of being FedRAMP moderate. A lot of the tools and technologies that we've used over the last 5 years have been open source. Spending multi-million dollars on proprietary tools, while fun as a security practitioner, um, doesn't help the mission and it doesn't help drive science forward. It creates bottlenecks as you go. I think one of the important things here is to realize that you shed some of that inertia. So the initial uplift to FedRAMP or FISMA or CMMC is brutal at the front. You have to harden your images, you have to apply STIGs, you have to figure out FIPS, which, if anybody has done, is a horrible, horrible mess of figuring that out. I think one of the keys is once you bake that into your pipelines, you get that inertia going, and it becomes a standard operational rhythm, it becomes easier. Every year you become see better at this. And after the initial uplift, right, for FedRAMP and FISMA, it's all hundreds of controls. But then after that, right, it's 1/3 control assessment every year. So it becomes far easier as you go. If you want to go to the next slide. I think as we have solved a lot of these FedRAMP requirements inside of CTDS, whether it's baking FIPS into the public images, moving to Amazon Linux 2023 The community inherits a lot of those security controls that we've built. And we take a lot of the brunt in some of these as we try to be ahead of the FedRAMP and FISMA and global compliance regimes. So we take a lot of that friction up front, and so that you hopefully have an easier path forward to map out your controls and be able to actually run Gen 3. We also believe that there's security as a checkbox, which is often some of these compliance regimes, and there's actually building secure and scalable solutions that go beyond just those federal mandates. So we've pushed a lot of security into the pipelines. We use a lot of open source code that gets pulled continuously, and we try to continually be more secure and more resilient. And that baseline, we hope, continues to move into all of your areas and be able to help you all be more secure in general. And to the next slide. So as you go through audit and through general compliance, there is a reality check there, right? The Appendix Q is difficult. You have to actually walk the diagram. So think of it back to when we talked about, or when you've ever done a threat model and you need to know where the data is moving, how it's moving, and where it ends up being stored. If you think of it that way, right, Appendix Q is basically a cryptography table, right? They want to know every place the data is, where it's stored, how it's transmitted, and to make sure that it is compliant. One of the hardest and most annoying things of that table is making sure that you have the CVMPs, right? The certified cryptography module. You have to go to the websites. You have to find, hopefully, current certificates. And if not, you have to go argue with your auditors or argue with your vendors to figure out why they're not on a compliant version. And I think one of the secrets to record time auditing is achieving that compliance as code. And I think Colin will touch on a lot of this, but baking in a security culture is important. It makes audit and compliance so much easier if people understand fundamentally the mission, but also what your compliance regime actually needs to achieve. Go ahead, slide. To that end, I know during our first year of FedRAMP compliance and potentially FISMA compliance, there's a little bit of a scary thing about auditing and being able to argue with your auditors. I think it's important to understand that you are supposed to argue with your auditors. That's what keeps them honest. So never blindly saying no. Checklist compliance will often kill science. You have to protect what it is that you're doing while satisfying the mandate. Oftentimes, that means that you have to understand the threat model. How do you defend keeping GraphQL introspection on, which is critical, but the pen testers will tell you that that's a horrible mistake. So how do you layer technology and security on top of that to make sure that you can continue to use a lot of these technologies and systems and tools that you actually need, and to enable the science and the researchers to continue their jobs? And of course, being creative, right? It's knowing deep code context and layered security helps with the federal compliance, especially. Being able to argue with your auditors and being confident to be able to say, yes, GraphQL introspection is on, but here's why it doesn't matter. Slide. It's also important to meet engineers where they live. So if you're generating thousands of tickets in some scanner application, but they never end up at a developer or the engineer or IT or whoever has to fix the problem, in the system they work in, that creates a lot of friction. So meeting them where they are is really important. Dumb scanners often destroy velocity. We recently moved to Amazon Linux 2023, and we did that strategically to help us and all of you because Amazon Linux actually patches just about everything. If you pull their very latest image and you run it through vulnerability scanners that actually understand Amazon Linux's patching, they typically come up with 0 vulnerabilities. Amazon backports a lot of those patches and they give you FIPS for free. So it made a lot of sense for us to move there. One of the key findings, though, is most scanners don't actually understand that Amazon has backported thousands of vulnerability patches back into the Linux kernel. So definitely make sure as you go forward that your scanners actually understand that, because if not, you'll have alert fatigue, and if you have to fill out a POAM for every single vulnerability and then try to explain why it's not actually valid, you will drown in paperwork. And of course, intelligent routing, make sure that it goes to the right queue, to the right owner, and you have that conversation. Slide. So we hope that we continue to help stop duplicating the pain. We hope that as we continue down the FISMA, FedRAMP, and other security paths, as well as just general security hardening of the Gen3 system, that you are able to bring that in and ease some of that compliance burden on all of you. We are working on a way to be able to share a list of false positives, right? We know the code deeply, and we often argue with our auditors and FedRAMP that this library isn't actually used in a way that's vulnerable. So, of course, it doesn't actually need to be patched. Being able to share that more broadly, still securely, right? We won't publish that, but making that available to those of you going through the FISMA or FedRAMP process is important so that you can label us as a vendor and be able to prove to your auditor you are talking to us. And of course, making sure that we continue to keep things relevant so that you don't have to go fork Gen 3 and try and figure out how to patch what either doesn't need to be patched or what we've already identified as false positives. Slide. So looking to FedRAMP 20X, there is a new pain index. We're still all grappling with what 20X actually wants, but it's shifting a lot from flat CVSS scores to active risk and continuous validation, as well as being, as a vendor, being able to define what makes up your pain index. And because we've baked a lot of this into our pipelines, we are already ready for it. It's critical that continuous integration and the compliance as code continues down this process. And I think that's a major win of FedRAMP 20X is the push for machine readable formats and replication of data and continuous validation. So we look forward to moving into FedRAMP 20X as more comes out from that and as things become more stable. And I think that's my last slide. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Clint. That was some, interesting perspective on a lot of points. We have a few minutes, so if folks have any questions, feel free to type them or unmute. Otherwise, we can have a longer discussion at the end. Okay. I think we'll move along for now then. Thanks again, Clint. Okay, our next speaker is Jasper Van Dalum from Princess Máxima Center for Pediatric Oncology. And he's going to talk to us about advancing childhood cancer research, deploying and fortifying the NL4C Gen 3 portal. So please take it away, Jasper.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Jasper. I'm an info engineer at the Máxima Center, and I work partially for the IT department, and I also work for the Krumware group, which is one of the research groups within the Princess Máxima Center. Next slide, please. So first, a little bit about childhood cancer and the Princess Máxima Center. Childhood cancer is still quite a dangerous disease for children. It's quite rare, but it's one of the major causes of disease-related child death in high-income countries. We are able to treat them better and better. So the survival rate is around 75 to 80% today, but that's not the case for all types of cancers. There's still some types of cancers that are more difficult to treat, where the survival rate is a lot lower. So we still have to invest a lot into getting better at treating those cases. Next slide, please. Childhood cancer is quite rare if we compare it to adult cancer. It's very it's when we do research, it's very important that we have enough data, because otherwise you are just very limited in the research that you can do, and you have limited statistical power to come to conclusions. Collaboration is really key here. The mission of Máxima is to cure every child with cancer, and also to make sure that they will retain optimal quality of life. And so it's really important that we collaborate with international partners, because in some cases, for rare cancers within the Netherlands, there's only 3 cases of a specific type of cancer per year. So before you have a sufficient data set, it might take you years. And of course, you want to perform the best treatment as soon as possible. The Princess Máxima Center is the first single national center and the largest pediatric oncology institute within Europe. And we have been gathering data for around 8 years now. So we think that we are in a unique position to contribute to childhood cancer research worldwide. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, collaboration is very important to us. So to make this easier, we started the NL4C project, or the Dutch Comprehensive Childhood Cancer Commons. Because, as I said, we gathered a lot of data, but we also need to make sure that researchers from other institutes know that we have this data. So let me take you along here. When we get a new patient, a lot of clinical metadata is registered by our oncologists and research nurses. That's put in the health records. For every patient, we also collect 2 samples, a sample of tumor and also a sample of normal tissue. Both samples are then analyzed in the lab. We perform whole genome sequencing in all cases. And after that, our bioinformaticians analyze the data that comes out here. And we have diagnostics pipeline that will feed data back to the care site to make sure that we choose the right treatment for the patient, and that we apply the correct dosage with medicines. But we also use it for further research to come up with new treatment plans, maybe medicines that are used for a different type of cancer, but might also work for this type of cancer. So we can also better help future patients. This data is mostly being used internally now, but through the NL4C project, or the Gen3 data portal plays an important role. We also want to share this data with external researchers. Next slide, please. As I said before, we have quite a few data sources now. We have the RNA data, DNA data, we have analysis results with clinical data, we have analysis metadata. We needed some kind of standard process to get that data to the different data portals that we have. They each serve a different audience. They may show different data types. We wanted to have a standardized process here to make sure that the correct data is pulled, that we only pull data for consented patients, and that all the transformations that we need to apply are applied correctly, and that there's no human mistakes in between. So that's why we needed this. Next slide, please. And this is basically how we have set up our Gen3 data portal. So we applied 3 access levels. So the first access level is access to the aggregated metadata. And this is something that an external researcher can access without signing into our data portal. Then you can just get some access to the number of patients that we have available for data sharing, but also the number of patients with a certain tumor. And if a researcher thinks like, this data is interesting, I'm doing research into this tumor, I want to see more, then they can apply for access to the deep clinical metadata. And then they can sign in with their own institutional identity through Serve Research Access Management to get access to that. Then they can use the Gen3 data portal for sample discovery, create a list of samples of interest. And if they really want to continue, then they can put in a request with our Biobank Data Access Committee to actually get access to the raw VCF files, so they can perform even deeper analysis in our cloud environment. Next slide, please. We are working with some very sensitive data, healthcare data, genomics data, but also of a vulnerable group. So children that are underage, of course. So we have to be very careful with that, and we have to follow all the laws and standards that are there. So a few important ones to us are the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, but also ISO 27001, which is the information security standards, and then 7510, which is the information security standard within healthcare within the Netherlands. For GDPR, it's very important that we have consent from the patients of whom we process the data from. So we have some broad consent forms that we ask them to sign when we start treating them. And there's a lot of information in there that explains why this is important and how their data will be used for research. It's very broad, so it can be used for any research that we do within the center and also for international collaboration. So we don't have to go back to them for every new research project to ask for consent. And then we also perform some analysis to make sure that we have all the risks in view. So on the privacy side, we do a DPIA, or data privacy impact assessment. And there we map all the privacy risks of the data processing operations that we perform. So at first we try to describe all the processing steps. We try to assess the necessity of data processing and the proportionality. We also identify and assess the risks. There's a lot of questions in the list that we get. And these really help us to identify where certain risks are. Then we try to identify measurements to mitigate those risks. One of the managers or group leaders need to sign off on those, and everything is recorded. We put the mitigations into an action plan. We try to roll it out, and of course we keep this under review, see if everything has been implemented correctly, if all the things that we have discussed are actually being followed. And this is also something that we repeat every 2 years, or when there's very large changes within the data processing, to make sure that everything stays up to date. On the information security side, we also perform an analysis. So that's just an information security risk analysis. Here we describe the threats. We determine the risk levels. We come up with mitigations for the risks, or we try to transfer them, or we accept them in some cases. Once again, a manager or a group leader needs to sign off on those, and everything is recorded again. We put it into an action plan to implement the mitigations. And we also keep this one under review. So this is something we would repeat every year. Next slide, please. So I want to walk you through some of the findings of the data protection impact assessment that we performed. So as I mentioned before, pediatric cancer is quite rare. So we thought it would be very important to have some additional measures to further protect patient privacy. So it's a lot harder to be able to identify individual patients. In order to do this, we perform some data generalization, made the data less specific. We also make sure that all the dates that we might have in our internal data set, that those are removed. So a date of birth, so for example, you will not find in our data portal. What you will find is how old the patient is when we diagnose them, for example. So the information that is important for research is still in there, but things that we can leave out, we also try to leave out. We also suppress some of the data. So if the tumor type is really rare and we only have less than 5 patients, for example, then we also exclude them from our data sets for now, until we have more patients with the same tumor type, then we start including them, because otherwise it's too easy to identify them. We also make sure that we use a new set of identifiers for our subjects and also for all the other types, because otherwise it would be possible to look in our data portal, but also request information from a publication that we might have done elsewhere, combine the data, and then get too much information about our patients anyway. As I also mentioned before, consent is very important to us. We also want to make sure that everyone is actively informed about what we are doing here. We talk with our client council. We also publish transparent information on our website about the NL4C, but also in general about international collaboration that we do. And for access to actually sensitive data, we of course have a strict process in place to determine if someone indeed is allowed to get access or should not have access. Next slide, please. Some of the most important findings of the information security risk analysis were that it's of course important to keep systems to date, because then you can more easily prevent exploitable vulnerabilities. We have built a CI/CD pipeline to make it very easy to upgrade to the latest version, and to also implement some additional security controls that we have running in Google Cloud, where we also have our Kubernetes cluster. In front of our Gen3 portal, we have Cloud Armor, which is a web application firewall, which we can use to block certain exploits. This is done using threat signatures. What we did notice is that you do have to tune it a little bit yourself, because otherwise it's also blocking legitimate traffic. So that's a little bit of trial and error, and you should really do that before just rolling it out. And we also have some automated security scans going on via the web security scanner in Google Cloud. We also have that ETL pipeline to make sure that only the correct data is being uploaded to our data portal, and that we apply the correct measures to make it harder to identify individual patients. We have quite a few data sources, so it's quite a complex process, but because it's all automated, we reduce the risk of human error there. And one of the big issues is always that it's difficult to secure end user accounts. So for this, we have used Serve Research Access Management, which allows users from other research institutes to sign in using their institutional identities. Usually those are a little bit better protected than a personal account. So there's 2-factor authentication enabled there, but also better monitoring. And when someone leaves their institute, their account is blocked, and they then also lose access to our data portal. Next slide, please. If you would like to know more about the NL4C project, I only got 15 minutes, so I thought it would be nice to include some additional information here. There's some QR codes you can scan, but the slides will also be shared. The links are also there to be clicked later. Next slide, please. And I also would like to thank all my colleagues from the camera group for all their contributions to this project. I would also like to thank the company SE4Bio. They've been very helpful with implementing some of the nice to haves for our data portal, but they also very much helped us with the security analysis and the KPI. I would like to thank the Gen3 community. The Slack channel is very useful to us when we run into issues. Sometimes someone else already ran into the issue and we can copy their fix. And Gen3 development team, we really like the application, and we also very much appreciate all the help that we have received over the past. And last but not least, the children and their parents for consenting to us to use their data for research. This really helps us achieve our mission. Thank you. And there's one last slide. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Next slide. So it's what the data portal looks like when you visit it without an account.
Great. Thanks, Jasper. Are there any questions from the attendees? I have one if no one does. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Jasper. I had a question, and not to put you on the spot, but I was thinking of asking all of our external speakers, are there things, you think the Slack channel thing, that's great, but I'm wondering if there's anything else that you think that Gen3 or the community or these forums could be doing to support specifically. I'm thinking, security and compliance, but I guess if you have the floor, you can mention something else. But we want to make sure that we can support new operators, as well as we can. So if there's some security thing or compliance thing, a challenge you work through, and if you have anything in mind that the community or we could work towards, let us know.
Yeah. Sometimes we were indeed running into some issues. With some help, we were able to solve them most of the times. But yeah, when we really started with Gen3, the documentation was sometimes quite hard for us to find the right information. Sometimes it was included somewhere in GitHub, sometimes it was included somewhere in the documentation. And I think some really great steps have been taken with all the videos that were published on how you can deploy it for the first time. Having those available when we started working with the Gen3 data portal would have been really helpful to us. So I think some really nice steps have already been taken there. So yeah, that's also a very big compliment to the team. I'm very happy with that all that information is available now to us. And yeah, if we run into any new issues, then of course we will let you know.
Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe there was. Oh, yes, there's a channel. I don't know specifically about this, but about, Gen3 documentation. Yep. Okay, so next slide, please, Charisma.
I think that's me.
I'll turn it over to Colin Griffin from Krumware. Hey, Colin, the floor is yours.
Hey, folks, I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for letting me speak to everybody today. Quick intro. This talk will be about compliance as code for modern platforms. Not going to get super deep into some elements of like maybe what code looks like. I got a couple screenshots and things like that, but I wanted to keep it pretty high level today and really talk through some of the conceptual pieces and some of the things that we're going through and have adopted and some of these patterns to help people kind of transition from maybe a current state of how are you maintaining compliance in a more of a classical IT. I hate that I have to call it classical now, but more of a standard IT flow versus kind of where things are going, especially as we get all the AI and agentic stuff and how much faster things are moving today. So today, the talk is compliance as code for modern platforms. I'm Colin Griffin. I'm the founder and CEO of Krumware. We're an organization that helps other companies develop and build cloud native platforms and software development platforms. We got pulled into Gen3 several years ago because it was Gen3 was one part of a broader platform for one of our research institution customers. And so we needed to go in and work on the Helm chart and do some stuff there. So that was a lot of fun, and we're continuing to collaborate and really appreciative of the community there. One quick note is I'm also a co-chair of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's Platform Engineering Technical Community Group. So I'll have some references and artifacts to some open source projects to help you step through this journey, as well as apply some broader principles to how you manage your cloud native or modern platform environment. Let's go ahead, next slide. So one of the biggest problems that we face today, regardless of industry, is that all the different compliance platforms and the compliance organizations just can't keep up with how technology is evolving. And I think that is changing as technology is able to address and create some of our frameworks and foundations around compliance, or leverage some of our documentation and compliance in order to drive development. And we're going to talk through a little bit of that. But today's really big gap is that mostly we're used to compliance frameworks and things just strictly being in documentation, or we run through and do an assessment with a third-party organization, and that requires us to show evidence, take a bunch of screenshots, do a lot of manual work. Unfortunately, technology really is just moving faster than, and I'm missing a bullet because I think I added it too late in the slide, but that's okay. Technology really is moving faster than the compliance frameworks can keep up. And like it says here, a lot of times policy just lives in documents today, but systems live in code, so they drift, and we can't really have one leverage the other effectively. So we need to find ways to bring those back together. One anecdote is when we got started with Gen3, we called the National Institute of Health and made our way up to several, to some director levels to try to get insight and say, hey, we're deploying this Gen3 platform for a research institution. We need to, we didn't name Gen3 at the time, but we need to understand, what compliance frameworks do we need to be following for this? And the NIH actually referred back to us. They said, hey, we're not really sure, but we're watching this project called Gen3 to see what they come up with. So I thought that was an interesting full circle moment for us, because it was exactly what we were trying to figure out. So it just shows that the technology moves faster than the organization. So it makes it challenging to leverage compliance. So go ahead, next slide. Now, what do we mean by a modern platform? So today, Kubernetes and containers and everything that a lot of the folks in the Gen3 community almost were required to adopt as part of their journey, and how do I deploy and manage Gen3. The container and Kubernetes technologies were created to provide more agility and flexibility for people to treat software and applications as the infrastructure, and to start to marry similar infrastructure management lifecycle as well as software or application management or lifecycle management into similar similar areas, similar overlap. So today, modern platform, we're usually referring to what is a cloud native platform. So the good news is today with Gen3, you already have one, right? You have a modern platform. It's a very complete stack. Jawad shows a lot of really great things as well on the community calls. And you honestly are probably, without knowing it or with knowing it, you're leveraging Gen3 to take you through a maturity journey to understand what modern platform engineering looks like. So this portion with compliance as code is, we need frameworks in our organization that we can manage and we can follow and leverage the same way we now are putting some attention into how do we manage infrastructure. Next slide. So just a couple of artifacts for folks to try to help you understand the broader picture as far as modern platforms and how your organization can evolve alongside the software. The cloud native maturity model and the platform engineering maturity model are two really great artifacts that you can Google and you can reference. I've also, as these slides get shared, I've got links at the end of the collection of slides that you can use to get to some of these. But maturity models as a concept are really important. Next slide. So for us, and it's important to think with this mindset with compliance as well, right? being a mature organization doesn't necessarily mean you've gotten to level 5 or the end goal of what a maturity framework looks like. The important thing is identifying what's right sized to your organization and your users or your customers' needs or your researchers' needs, and stepping and getting things to that point. The same thing is here with compliance. You could go to the ends of the earth in compliance, but you'll notice that a number of different compliance frameworks like CIS V8 and others have multiple levels, and you likely might not need to try to spend all of your time and money and energy trying to get to in CIS it's level 3, in others it's different, but you might not need to get to that last level. So the first step really is identifying and understanding what level of maturity or what level of compliance you need to achieve. Next slide, please. So other good news is you probably already are following a good framework. We at Crom, we follow CIS Controls V8. That's not a recent thing for us as far as what framework to follow. And the reason we follow CIS V8 is because it has mapping to various other compliance frameworks. So that means that we don't have to think as hard about all the different compliance frameworks and how to meet their unique needs. We just know that if we hit a certain level of coverage in CIS V8, that those mappings are completed to us. Auditors love that because it makes their jobs easier as well. But those are broader industry standards that we're rooted in. That's not something that we invented. CIS V8 maps to HIPAA, to NIST 800, to others. So if you're interested in trying to find a framework you can follow, that's a good one. Now, the problem today is that most of these frameworks are just in documentation, right? They're not necessarily in artifacts or in code or things that we can track. CIS V8 today has 153 different safeguards that we need to follow. So when we go through those different audit trails, or the audits, we need to go prove that we hit 153 safeguards. So that's a terrifying and really strenuous process, even if we have all the evidence, because there's a manual compilation and stuff that needs to happen with that. Next slide, please. So in order to kind of flip the script, right, we needed to try to determine how do we actually treat this compliance framework or the way our organization operates more broadly the same way that we think about code. We're all developers at our company, right? We understand the reasons and the needs for these things, but managing and maintaining compliance is a big challenge, and we can't necessarily afford to hire someone specific for that or outsource all of that. So what we have done as part of our journey, and many other organizations are doing the same, is we have tried to flip that script and turn things into code level artifacts. So what we did is we compared the software development lifecycle to the kind of the policy management lifecycle. So these are some elements that we have put into place. In software development, we try to push for a single source of truth, and a lot of that you'll hear Git and GitHub. We obviously use that, but you don't necessarily need to go all the way to that depth of maturity to have actual code in Git as your policies, right? The key thing is making sure that you have these characteristics around your policy, right? Documents are version controlled. You have clear access control as far as who can edit a document, who's an owner of a document, who can view a document, those types of things. You start to implement clear life cycle for these documents, what's in draft, what's degraded, or where is there an issue or a bug, when was something activated, when is it active? Those types of statuses are important to define, and those are important to track with features of software as well. Right, implementing review cadences. So, we need to go inspect and make sure our software dependencies aren't out of date. Well, what about the policy, right? We need to have active review and compare to the frameworks. So what we have done, and we've got some additional ones in here, auditability and traceability and things are obvious. What we've done is we actually converted CIS V8 into code alongside all of the evidence that we use, the audit trails, everything else for how we actually meet those needs. Those are in code as well alongside the CIS V8 with clear mappings between all of those safeguards and the ways that we implement those. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the payoffs about that. Next slide, please. That's where you have to start. Now, another kind of starting point, a lot of folks, I mentioned not necessarily needing to be in Git. You might be in Confluence. SharePoint might be a little tougher in some cases, but what we're able to do in Confluence is if we're using Confluence, we use both. We actually feed Confluence, but either way, Confluence does act as a source of truth for us because we add the version control. We can have releases. We have the access control we need. We have the lifecycle and the statuses. We're able to do our peer review. There's an audit trail for the changes, and we're able to apply review cadences. Now, one way we achieved that is we added some extra metadata into the documents, and that gave us some of the extra things that we need. You probably can use other things like SharePoint, but what you might have to do or might consider doing is, just like you will in your compliance docs, is you may have a section of metadata at the beginning of a doc that says last signed off by whom, who owns this document, when was the last time that this was signed off, where's the log sheet, all that stuff, right, is in files for many of us. Anyways, if you haven't implemented that, you really need to. The key is making it discoverable so that you can start to use it with other workflows. So the big challenge with Confluence, it's a wiki, so anyone can edit it. So you have a little bit more overhead as far as setting that system up. Next slide, please. Now, the next evolution of that, right? If we want to step through and build maturity, the first thing is making sure things are trackable. You may not need to go all in on compliance as code. So today, what we've done is we took that next step and we moved into that CIS kind of V8, moved everything into code, all of our policy, everything's alongside each other, and we have common schemas and frameworks, and we've applied a lot of our software level principles to that. And I hope one of my extra slides shows up, but we've got some examples of that we can share as well. But because we now have everything defined in code, we're able to get some back-end payoffs for things like how do we actually generate code and additional policy as code from those sources? And then how do we actually do testing against those sources to say, are we out of date? Does this code fit our compliance needs? And things like that. Next slide, please. So what that starts to look like as it evolves, right, is you start to get into this idea where I have structured control over my artifacts. Then I'm able to implement policy engines effectively to provide continuous governance around those artifacts. So does my code meet those standards? Is my infrastructure allowing certain users to deploy certain things based on their roles and what they're able to do according to my organizational policies, things like that. And then the big payoff is the evidence, right? As we make changes and as we evolve and as things happen in our systems, we have automatically generated just evidence chains and logs and things that are happening that we no longer need to go manage manually. So that's a big payoff. But additionally, what we can start to do is treat changes to policy or policy gaps as like bugs, just like they're in software. So somebody can make a feature request or a bug request against our repository for our docs. We can mark that issue. That issue gets logged at that moment. And so we can mark that as evidence or a gap or a risk that we need to assess. So we can report that list to our auditors to say, hey, here's our gaps today. Here's the plan to achieve these. We've moved them into a roadmap and a pipeline. And those fixes coming back in start to feel a lot like a CI/CD process, right? Just like software lifecycle. So now we can think about that stuff the same way. To get into the weeds, you can adopt several different policy engines in Kubernetes alongside what you have today. Just might be a little bit of a lift as you start to move into some of the policy as code or understanding these concepts. Open Policy Agent or OPA is one of those. Kyverno is a great tool as well. And Cloud Custodian, I think that was actually, no, it was Cloud Armor that was referenced. But those are good tools. Guardrails at admission time might be things like KubeWarden or NuVector or some others. And then, right, as evidence is generated, we put that into Jira, into Confluence, into GitHub. There's all kinds of places that just managing our code and managing our policy at the same time, has that similar flow and generates those artifacts. So go ahead, next slide. I wish these were refreshed. Let me get back to, there we go.
Did you change the slides? Should we refresh them, Colin?
If you could, I've got a couple of just one or two additional that I think will be helpful, but sorry for the trouble there. I pulled them in off of a different deck after I realized that they would be nice.
Just a second.
There we go. It would be slide 28 or, okay. Where are we in the, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's good. It would be, next slide, please. So one project as you continue to advance that I wanted to highlight is a project called Jamara from the Open Source Security Foundation. Jamara is actually a project that's attempting to help organizations adopt and move to a policy-first approach to their compliance management as well as their code. So this is a quick outline of Jamara. There's several different categories and layers that Jamara looks to enforce and help capture. So I don't want to spend a bunch of time on it for time, but definitely take a look at Jamara as an example of what that may look like. Now, for us, we did it a little differently, but Jamara is something that we are actively adopting. So the next slide, I'll talk about what we're doing internally. And this is a lot more code level. So one thing that we've done internally is we have a tool or a project we call Context as a product. As we evolve into the kind of the artificial intelligence age, the big challenge is how do we actually prove that code that was produced, whether by a human or by an agent, actually meets organizational policy? There is a huge challenge today, especially with all the agentic stuff, where we actually don't really know where things come from. And in the research domain, when you submit a paper to be published in a medical journal or whatever, there's a tremendous amount of review that happens in that process because you have to cite your sources, prove where things came from. We think that's an amazing concept that doesn't really exist anywhere else, and that's unfortunate. So we're trying to bring that same concept, though, of citing your sources and also tagging things as legitimate sources and being able to have your organization specify, hey, these are the sources of truth that we need to reference. Go prove in your code alongside your code that it fits, right? Then we're able to actually now test for depth and breadth of coverage to make sure that our code is compliant at that level. So again, for the auditors and the audit trails, it also does kind of that reverse flow that we talked about. And we're trying to open source this, but again, just talking about it in concept. If somebody writes some code and there's a gap in policy and they can't reference a policy to prove that this code is meaningful and actually fulfills a need, then what we do is we're able to use kind of a code linter to basically say, hey, this code isn't proven. You need to go either create a policy or create an exception that a policy doesn't exist. And that feeds right back into our pipeline for submit a bug on our policy repo. We need to create a new policy. What's referencing that? Where's the justification? We start to create that pipeline where code now drives policy and policy drives code. So that's something that we're implementing. If that's a concept that's interesting to folks as well, happy to share more about that. This will be open source here shortly, but Jamara is a project that's trying to help enable a similar flow as well. Next slide, please. So one control end to end, right, would be identifying the regulation, creating a tracked version of the control, so internal copy or internal artifacts that are tracked with the the principles and properties that I mentioned before. And then also like the evidence and the enforcement gates. So in our platform level, being able to leverage policy to enforce and meet what is defined in those tracked controls. And then also the evidence, the audit logs, the chains and things there. Next slide. So this is a kind of a review. I love that somebody mentioned SharePoint. So this is kind of a review of the maturity journey that you can take. I hope that it is helpful. We entered that about the level 2 here, a docs code, was us just creating a source of truth for the framework that we follow, as well as the evidence, the run books, the standards, everything referenceable around that in a similar format. Then mapping that back to enforcement, so showing and proving that your access control and everything else meets organizational policy, so implementing that and verifying it. Now, the next step beyond that is code level coverage, proving that your code meets compliance, so we can shorten that audit gap as well. And then level 5 is something, right, that we all want to achieve with this new world of AI, which is, why can't we just govern our organizational policy and understand the business value we give to our end users and our customers and manage that and have the actual implementation of that generated for us, right? If we can prove and trust that chain of custody goes all the way back to our organizational policy, then we start to really talk about compliance for code rather than compliance as code. And I think that's a really powerful concept that, if you are taking the time to do compliance as code, you'll be better prepared for. Next slide, please. All right, so only a couple more slides, some honest caveats. Putting policy in code doesn't mean that it's correct. You're right, just because it's there doesn't mean somebody is reviewing it. Somebody is actively checking that. Be really careful about just having AI go generate a bunch of stuff for you. You still actively need to show that you're following that. You can't just go leave it unchecked. So that's just something I wanted to call out. Everyone probably rolls their eyes at that, but almost everywhere we go when we talk to folks, that is actively happening and becomes a source of cost or expense, right? And that goes into, this is still code as well. Auditor education might be needed. If you're too advanced or beyond what the auditor is used to seeing, then you may still have to go back through that manual proof process. And that can be challenging. And then upkeep cost. As you're going through that maturity journey, this isn't a magic bullet. You could increase your overhead before it decreases, but that may be a necessary step. Next slide. Let's see. So these are, when you look at review the slides later, these are some extra tips that you can follow. Next slide, please. And then these are the sources that you can go and check out some of those artifacts and things that I referenced today. If anybody would like to hear more about our experience, open door policy, happen to talk with folks outside of this when you have time, or privately, since I know this can be a sensitive subject, especially if you aren't meeting certain safeguards today. But happy to talk through what that looks like. And that's it. That's my last slide.
Great. Thank you, Colin. Are there any questions for Colin? I know that we've talked about compliance as code before, Colin, but I think I have a much better perspective of what you mean and what it can mean, I guess, after seeing this. So thanks.
Yeah. I did have a screenshot that we missed back on 32 to show, but if anyone looks at that when they review the slides later, it's just marked down, right? All of our as code is marked down at this point. So just to make anybody feel better, markdown is a really achievable. It's not like codified in JavaScript or something like that.
All right, we're going to move on to the final speaker, And thanks, Knuckle, for getting here so early in the morning for you. You even got here right on time, so I appreciate it. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, folks. The sun's just about to come up and it's cold, so I really love talking about security at this time. Um, cool. So I work for Australian BioCommons. My name is Nakul. A little bit of background about myself. I've worked in security for almost 10 years, mostly around risk management. I've worked as an auditor. I've worked as a security consultant in engineering, as part of a SOC. And most recently, I joined Australian BioCommons to help them uplift their security for the Gen3 data commons. We have a project called the Australian Cardiovascular Disease Data Commons, which is a bit of a mouthful to say, so we call it the ACDC project. As for the ACDC project, I was hired to come in and get the ACDC platform to come in and make it ISO 27K certified. The problem with that is that ISO 27K is not a system level certification. It is an organizational level certification. While that was still the right framework to go for, I think a lot of the reasonings changed at Australian BioCommons. To give you an idea of what Australian BioCommons is, it's a project between 4 or 5 different universities and about 6 other medical research institutions in Australia. So it doesn't actually exist as a separate organization. It's led by University of Melbourne, but it doesn't exist as a subsidiary or as an arm. It's just a simple document of a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, between a bunch of different parties, including Bioplatforms Australia. Um, this provides a little bit of a challenge because the challenge that we have in security is definitely a lot of the times that, are you secure and then can you prove that you're secure? But ISO 27K sort of affects things in a different manner. Can we move to the next slide? So it's coming up as a nationally significant research infrastructure provider because we're trying to give all these data commons, a workflow so that people can work on genomic data. But now that we're starting to ingest human genomic data, people are getting, privacy conscious. What are the rules and what are the regulations? What do we need to do to make sure that this data that we're going to get from all these patients is safe and secure? Um, but at the same time, Australian BioCommons is a slightly different identity to University of Melbourne. We have our own at biocommons.org.au email address. We have our own domains outside of the SharePoint that University of Melbourne uses. We have our own Google Workspace. We have our own AWS accounts. We have our own contracts. So effectively, for the purposes of University of Melbourne, we're a risk because we operate as a shadow IT to them because a lot of our systems are diverse. Um, as part of doing the security uplift, there's a few things about why ISO 27K is still right. There's an increase in number of security forms. Funding cases were publicly funded, so the expectations of security are almost a misnomer. If you don't have a couple of paragraphs on how seriously you're taking security, you're not going to get funded. The host institutions that we're part of, University of Sydney, University of Melbourne, they used to give us really, really low ratings until I joined. And then I explained to them that the way that you're giving us your privacy rating or your security ratings is you're considering this a risk to the wider university. So the wider university looks at it and goes, oh, you have your own separate thing. It causes us no damage in case you get popped. So low risk for us. And then we explain to them, hey, that's not really the case. That's not how we work. We actually contain all of this data from here. We have touch points. We use your laptops. We need to work together to do these things. And that increased a lot of the risk ratings. They're like, oh, okay, we completely misunderstood the concept of the project. And then it fell on us to prove to our own host institutions that we're doing things safely and securely. Um, there's not as much regulatory scrutiny in Australia as there is in the EU and the US around this sort of stuff, possibly because just the scale at which that it operates is a bit different, so the impact is a lot lower. And with I don't know if you've heard about this new concept, artificial intelligence. It's new. I don't know, but anyway, because of that, the attack complexity and frequency is off the charts. You're looking at um, ransomware that's been completely operated and installed by AI without any human intervention out in the wild. Can we get to the next slide, please? So why ISO 27K? we're fragmented. We're fragmented across a bunch of different universities. But how do you make sure that, you know, somebody from University of Sydney using a University of Sydney laptop, using CrowdStrike that's operated by University of Sydney, is then managed and is at an acceptable security level for whatever your organizational policy is, as somebody who's hosted by University of Melbourne, working on projects that are outside of University of Melbourne? What happens when you include BYD? Sorry, bring your own devices. Um, ISO 27K is an awesome journey because it actually forces us to have the hard conversations around who owns what. A lot of the times, projects can try and take an advantage of both the obscurity of where they sit and as well as the fact that they sit everywhere as an advantage to make relationships with other organizations. But at a certain point, you kind of have to know, and more importantly, prove that we know who owns what controls, how responsibilities are distributed, and where that governance structure is. At this point, the technical security, that Clint, for example, has done with FedRAMP, it actually flows in through us, and University of Chicago becomes a supplier to us, and that's how we manage that relationships. Because at a certain point, you end up, I guess, boiling the ocean. To forgive my consulting speak. Can you go to the next slide? And so what we end up doing is trying to figure out what are the risks. Are we managing the risks as BioCommons, not as University of Melbourne, not as University of Sydney, but as an Australian BioCommons? Are we actually actively managing our top level risks? What are our top level risks? Do we know? Do we have a register for these things? And a lot of these things might seem basic, but the point of ISO 27K is to understand, well, who does what? It's not to prescribe you, for example, in FedRAMP, I think it is what NIST 853 type controls that it prescribes that you must do this. There is no such thing for ISO 27K. It says you must have an access control, but it doesn't define how you do implement that access control. That's sort of up to you. But as long as you can prove that you're managing your important risks and you can show, okay, well, we're a medium risk level tolerance organization, and everything that's high, we're working to critical or higher critical, we're working to bring that down to medium, which is our accepted risk profile. That is what the work that we have in place, and that is how we manage our entirety of our security. Well, that's the level that it needs at an organization. And then an auditor comes in once you have all of this done, and then asks you questions around that, and then you prove that you are taking security seriously by showing them how you're doing it. For us, these are the risks that we're sort of mapping about 37 different risks. These are the top risks that we're looking at managing at the moment because these are the ones that are sort of hardest to do. Can we go to the next slide? And I think with ISO 27K, especially in an organization that sits at the intersect of actual other organizations, you're looking at the question of what's the scope? How do we can't bind everything? The Australian BioCommons has about 9 different projects that are happening, some of them which will come in scope, some of them don't come in scope. And I think there's about 14 different sub-services that we offer, just like a tool finder, for example, that helps you find tools. So in this case, what is the scope? So this has been one of the most critical exercises. It's been taking a while, but actually having the conversations with management about the expectations from host universities and our funders to understand, well, what is this scope has been the thing that's allowed us to make sure that we operate things effectively. Can we go to the next slide? The way that we've done it is that we found out what's our main scope, the thing that we want to secure. It's the Gen3 platform. It's sitting on AWS. It's got Auth0 in front of it. And we might have future omics platforms that are basically the same stack on this platform. That's the main scope. That is the scope that we want to make sure we have it right. All of these providers, all of the code that comes into place, any changes that happen to it, any vulnerabilities that we find during this, monitoring detection, all of the controls go here. Next slide. Then we have a supporting scope. It's like, okay, well, if we have a risk of malware, where can we introduce, where is malware introduced? Where is account compromise introduced? It doesn't just directly happen onto the Gen3 platform. Sometimes you get, your GitHubs, your CI/CD pipelines, your data access committees that decide where, the procedure to decide which researcher gets access to which data set. That becomes the supporting scope to your main scope, because if there's a fault in here, it's likely going to lead a fault in the main scope. Next slide. And then we have a commons flow. Like I said, we have 14 plus 9 different services that we operate. And not all of that need to be certified. Not all of it needs to be ticked off the list. So what are some of the things that actually can lead into it? So your email, the workspace, documentation repos like Confluence, your ticketing systems, which may contain automated information. And if it hasn't been sanitized, it definitely comes under the common scope. So you need to make sure that you have your controls around those platforms as well. Next slide. And then you get something like a process scope, which is, well, are you onboarding the right amount of people? And this is, I think, the hardest part because one of the controls is background checks. And if how are we to trust that the background checks of every other host institution and the contractors that we come in with are doing this? And we're publicly funded. So if we don't have I guess the amount of funds that are available to retest almost every single person that comes in or do our own separate background checks, we have to have reliance on our host institutions. So defining that line between who owns what becomes it's like playing chess, but it's also one of the things that once you have it in line, and once everybody's signed off on it, I know it's a bit cool, but once it's there, it becomes to a point where you start seeing some real improvements in how security is taken. People can talk to their own security, and you get a level of visibility across. New slide, next slide. Across all of these risks, you end up understanding. Okay, well, once we have our account compromised in this chain, have we done enough to make sure that our account compromise across our main scope, across our supporting scope, across our other types of scopes that we have, and we say, yes, we do actually have the right controls in place because this is a risk that we're actively managing. If there's another thing along the lines of AI, how are we treating that risk? Is it allowing people to have artificial intelligence, getting them access to the actual data sets? What about if it's for other personal commercial reasons? How do we make sure that Gemini itself, that's already as part of our Google Workspace, has the appropriate controls put into place? What about SharePoint? But the SharePoint isn't controlled by us, but it contains all of our security information. It contains information about the foundation of BioCommons, contains funding grants information, but that's controlled by University of Melbourne. So what is the audit process around that? Can we go next slide? So what we've done is we've had a project. Jeff, Jonathan, Stephen, Conrad, and Samitha are BioCommons folks who are actually we're actually working this on a project together. Jeff, Jonathan, and Stephen are directors of Australian BioCommons. We've got top level support from them. Conrad and Samitha are technology and project management to help me keep my mind straight, just because you've got so many moving parts. I think we've got 136 different policies that we actually need to create new ones for. Having 136 policies created for an organization from scratch is a lot of decisions need to be made, not just from a technology perspective, but from a perspective of who's going to do what. So a lot of the stuff that we've done so far is, we've set up fortnightly sprints and we've had our risk elicitation exercises, basically just to test the temperature of what does management think is the risks that need to actually be treated? What's out in the wild that actually needs to be looked at? How does that map to our existing controls? Which controls are delegated to which organization to do? And a lot of that we find is having to write 136 policies as a single person is I don't want to do that. So what we've done is we've had this AI assistant, Rosie. I don't know if you've heard, but I think there was an mRNA vaccine created by University of Sydney that cured the guy cured his dog of cancer by using ChatGPT. I can link it later to you guys, but it's a cute little story, and it was about the time where I decided that we need some help with AI and we can start introducing it. So we've introduced Rosie. Rosie's still in her initial phases. I guess we've got a lot of teething issues coming in place, but it's really, really great because what it allows me to do is, as a single point of security at Australian BioCommons, it allows me to distribute my responsibilities to the other folks. They can chat with the AI assistant at any point that they choose, so we don't need to set up meetings and block out time. And the interviews themselves get put into place. And then Rosie generates us a first couple of draft. So we found that a lot of the effort that's usually taken in drafting out has moved towards reviewing. So now we review documents a little bit more instead of spending time just drafting it and then having contentions about how we work together in this multi-institutional environment. We can talk more about Rosie later, but a lot of the backgrounds is very similar to Colin's, how we've done things about Git authoring, making sure that you have specific people around authors, approvers, and read-only access. And that's been really great. We've been versioning it with Git as the actual authoritative source of what's where the policies and documentation are. And in the future, we're hoping that the bot itself uses this information that it's gathered with the interviews with all of the directors, and the previous information knowledge that it has in our Google Workspace. We can actually create and rapidly prototype things like grant requests. How do we file for grants? How do we say give us money, please, but really really quickly? Um, we've been endorsed by University of Melbourne. They do a lot of architecture reviews. They've provided partner support. They've provided us a lot with tooling as well, including things like we've got Wiz for our cloud platforms, Orca security. University of Chicago, obviously, they've been very helpful. Clint's been amazing in trying to well tell me that make me feel better that I'm not going through FedRAMP. I think that's been his most job, but he's been really, really wonderful. We have a information security advisory center called CI ISAC for critical infrastructure, where it's just a government initiative where we feed each other threat information. So that we can find information before, I'm not on Instagram finding out that there's a breach that potentially affects me. It's gone through a singular feed of a network with our health and research centers. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, I've allegedly finished talking. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really great. Are there any questions for Nakul?
Brilliant.
Um, any questions from the speakers, from anyone? I'll just add the commentary then for everyone that thanks for the speakers for giving, I think, kind of high level. Obviously, we could dive into the details, but every, organization's compliance journey is going to be a little different. So hopefully, we appreciate everybody's perspective, which hopefully will be useful for some of the other community members going through their own unique process. Okay, so if there's no questions, I'll just wrap up and mention that we do not yet have a community forum topic finalized for 2 months from now. So if you have some ideas, please pass them along. And I'll just thank all the speakers again. It was really great hearing from all of you. So
Thanks, Michael.
take care, everybody. Talk to you all soon.